Okay, let's talk side project time. This is something that I really believe in, and I've tried to implement on most of the projects that I've led in some form or other to various degrees of success. If you're familiar with this concept, you may have heard of it referred to as like Google 20% or Google time or that sort of thing. The reality is it actually predates Google by decades. 3M actually has 15% of their employee time dedicated to working on personal interest projects. That is where Post-it notes came from, for example. Yeah, Google has definitely gotten a lot of benefit out of this because side project time at Google is where Gmail came from, the Google Earth came from, AdSense came from. This is ultimately, I guess, how Google started making money because AdSense came out of this 20% free time. What even is this? 20% time, side project time, is some percentage of your employees' time that is allocated, is protected, and they are allowed to use that for other purposes related to your business in some way. The boundaries on what is allowed and isn't allowed are very flexible and very different at different places. Maybe you can integrate it into your project. So if you're doing side project time, there are different benefits that you can get out of it. On sort of one extreme, this is a way for your devs to stretch themselves creatively, to take a little break from their day-to-day job, and to potentially improve their skill set. On the other side, you have the fact that you're potentially getting new features and new products coming out of this effort from your devs. And depending on which of those two things you're prioritizing, you may want to structure your side project time differently. So one thing that came out of DA Week for Dragon Age Inquisition was the Giant. The Giant is a project that one of the devs took on their own and became a creature that we put into the game and added to the bestiary of that game. So this kind of free exploration can legitimately benefit your game. Do you want to have allocated periods of time, or this to be time that the dev is responsible for finding on their own reconnaissance? I worry about making the dev find this time on their own, because I think what is very likely to happen if you do that is that you are going to end up kind of chewing away at this. They're going to end up getting allocated, and they're going to end up having difficulty finding time to do this. Some of your devs will do it, but a lot of them will just end up feeling like this was a benefit that you promised them that they weren't really able to take advantage of. So for me, I feel like you should guard this time, allocate this time specifically so that people can plan around it existing. Both because it's much more likely that it happens, but also because it gives opportunities for people to work together. If I have to find 10% of my time just sort of around my other projects, then chances are those times are not going to line up with other people, and it's going to be very difficult for me to work with other people on this kind of project. Carve that time out and make sure that it's protected. For me, I've tended to aim at around 10%. Google is 20%, 3M is 15%. Pick a number that you are tolerant of. I do not have the math to back this up, but my feeling is that at 10%, you're basically getting this for free, because the lift to productivity caused by a boost of creativity, a boost to morale that you're getting from doing this is more than, at least as much and probably more than, the actual lost work time that you're dedicating to this. As I said, I don't have the math to back this up, but that's my feeling. So my feeling is put it in there, and I think you will see the benefits. When is this time allocated? So there are kind of 2, maybe 3 broad concepts. You can do something that's relatively small amount of time, but with a high frequency, or you can do a larger amount of time, but at a lower frequency set. And I've actually done both. So let's use 10% as a benchmark and talk about different frequencies that can work with that. You could do it daily. That's a little bit less than an hour every single day. I don't think you're going to find that that works out super well because it's not really enough time to do very much. The context shift required just to enter into the mindset of doing something different is going to basically eat up almost all the time you've given people. Doing it once a week to get 10% is about half a day a week. This is one of the ways that I've actually done it on Dragon Age before. It was Friday afternoon, so it was a 4-hour block on Friday afternoons. High frequency, low time periods have the advantage of being something that's happening all the time. So they have that good impact on devs' morale and on their engagement. And for things that can be done in a lot of short periods of time, taking a course or things like that, they can actually be the best. Something that I found with this style is that they are very easy to be eroded away. Because it's something that's kind of just integrated into the standard behavior of the team, what can happen is, let's say, unscrupulous managers can start to book meetings around the edges of this time and start to carve away at this. And eventually, some people basically lose this time as it gets taken by the project and by leads who aren't respecting this time. Now, that can happen regardless of the frequency that you're doing, but what I found is for larger blocks of time, it's easier to guard that time from the top. The smaller and more tactical the time frame becomes, the more that the protection and enforcement needs to happen down at the ground level. So going up in size and decreasing frequency, you could do it monthly. Monthly would mean 10% would be doing about 2 days a month. I'm not sure that you get very many advantages doing it that way. At 2 days, it's still not really long enough to do much in the way of team building or larger projects, but it's infrequent enough that you're not getting that very strong habit forming that has the big lift on your dev team's creativity. So for me, I don't know that once a month is particularly useful. You could do it once a milestone, and that means something about every 10 weeks. So if you're doing it about every 10 weeks, then you do a whole week. That's 10%. Now that is getting you into the time frame where it actually opens the door to a bunch of new things. It means that teams can form. It means that you can do a showcase at the end of the week where people show off the work that they've done. In fact, you might even want to require that people present what they worked on over your week and show what they've been doing. This is also a place where you'll find that some people will do things like tools, which will actually get standing ovations because people will be addressing issues that they've encountered, but often when they're building tools, there are issues that other people have encountered as well. At this frequency, it's becoming more of a perk and less of a habit. So I think you're getting less of a constant kind of effect on the team, and it's more like you're injecting creativity and freedom into the team on a certain frequency. Because it's such a large period of time, you are able to, from the top, from the project leadership, guard this time a lot better than some of the smaller periods where it can kind of be tactically eroded away. Now, I've never gone beyond this point, but you could. You could do side project time once a year, and then your 10% looks like 5 weeks. which is really kind of interesting when you think about it, because now you potentially have the ability to even start tackling entire projects. Larger teams can form, cross-disciplinary groups can form. It's interesting. I think, though, that now the schedule impact becomes so obvious that it becomes very difficult to ignore. So unless you have full control of your finances in your studio, you probably can't do that. I would love to hear if anyone has done this kind of side project time on that scale, bringing it all together into a huge chunk of time. And going one further, you could even just do it at the end of every single project. So if you're on a 2-year project, you bring all of that side project time together into a 10-week section where everyone on the team is free to pursue things like making DLC or different game modes or whatever they want, new tools for the sequel. That's really exciting to me. It would be interesting to hear if anyone has actually done that. At that scale, once you're getting beyond a single week, you're starting to get into the scale, to the scope where some form of project management might be required. And you don't want to pull your project managers out of this process in order to force them to project manage this. So teams would have to figure out how they're going to manage themselves. At 1 week, I feel like it's reasonable to be pretty ad hoc and you just kind of get done what you get done. At potentially 10 weeks, now you're getting to the period of time where 10 weeks with no structure could start to be pretty chaotic. But I mean, I'd love to hear if anyone's actually done it. So something that BioWare as a whole was trying was something called Sidequest, which was 1 week at the end of the year, the entire studio all working together. Now, that's way below 10%, obviously, but it was designed as a supplement to some other form of side project time on the individual teams. The advantage of doing something studio-wide is it allows everyone, the leadership, everyone to really rally together behind this. And it allows cross-project teams to form. It allows you to investigate things that might not really be practical within the bounds of a single project. At the end of the day, if you were to ask me, well, what would I do if I was doing this now? And I think what I would try for is, first of all, try to get above that 10% that I've been talking about, but to do that through a hybrid approach. So I would try to reinstate something like DA Fridays, so you're getting 10% on a cadence of every Friday afternoon, and that is your anchor that you're using to anchor this concept. But then every 4 to 6 months, you add an additional week on where you're able to bring different things together and have teams form and combine their works into something much larger. And then at the end of that week, you have a showcase and you bring it all together. And then finally, layer a Sidequest style week at the end of the year where everybody across the entire studio can combine everything they've been working on, have a huge celebration of the dev team, and bring it all into a culmination. If you're doing DA Fridays, so that's 10% right there, if you add another 2 weeks, because every 6 months you do a full week, and then you add a third week at the end of the year for the entire studio, that's giving you something around 8 weeks a year, which is around 15%. So I'm not doubling the amount of time I'd be allocating to it, it's just an incremental increase. And I think by combining that constant habit-forming block of time every week with something with enough scale to allow larger things to come together, that you'd be able to get the best of both worlds. Both the improvement on dev team morale, as well as the opportunity for larger scale and scope things to come into being and to actually get into your project. So something to think about if you're thinking about doing this side project time is, how do you draw a box around it? You could just not draw a box at all. In side project time, do whatever you want. You want to learn a new skill? Great. You want to make some paper craft? Great. You want to sing? Go ahead. You want to dance? Whatever. You want to have a 6-hour lunch? Great. I don't like that. I think you want to draw some sort of box around this time for 2 reasons. One, because I think you're going to get more use out of what comes out of it. But also, a box of some sort will make it easier for the devs to actually come up with something to work on. Most of the time, for any of the DA Fridays or DA weeks, one of the rules was it has to be Dragon Age related. Doesn't have to be related to the project you're currently working on, but it has to be Dragon Age related. So if you put that constraint in place, then what you get is some things that are related to the game, some things that are related to skill building that will help them be better devs on the project, and sometimes you'll get Dragon Age related things that have nothing to do with the project that's currently going on. And I think that's pretty good. I don't think you should mind that you're getting some stuff that is not going to be immediately applicable. And you will definitely get stuff like that. You'll get someone that makes a board game that you are probably not going to commercialize, and you're probably not going to implement it in your game. So yeah, that time wasn't immediately commercially relevant, but that's not the entire point. So as you put constraints in place, and I think you should, be careful that you don't squeeze 2 things out of existence. You want to make sure that people still feel free to do training, even training that isn't related to their job. And the reason for this is that if they're doing cross-training with the other departments on the team, this helps build understanding. Even if this person is never going to make a storyboard in the game, them understanding the process of storyboarding is going to help them understand the way you tell story in your game. So it's a valuable lesson. And who knows, maybe they will use this skill for some other purpose. Definitely make sure you encourage and protect people who want to offer training or take training, because that's something you never want to squeeze out of existence. And the other thing to protect are people who want to do workflow improvements. You know, some people, that's where their brain goes, is I have an opportunity to do something on my own. The thing I want to focus on is making a workflow smoother by making a tool or improving a process. That's awesome. You want that to go on through most of the project. Maybe when you're in the final part of finaling, now is not the time to open the side of your engine open and shove their hand in there. But for most of the rest of your development, if someone wants to go in there and shave some of the friction off of your tools, you definitely want to encourage that sort of behavior. So some pitfalls for this kind of side project time. Very early in a project cycle, you don't have a lot of functional code. So if you are being overly constrained in terms of what you are allowing to be worked on, you might find that a lot of people are not having a lot of success working on it. Some people will come up with great ideas early in development to build new tools or to explore new narrative spaces or all kinds of crazy things. But some people, if there isn't a well-established scaffolding of the game to hang things off of, are going to struggle to come up with things. So in the early days, you may need to provide support to your devs to help them figure out things to do that are relevant to the project, or at least the IP. Some people aren't going to want to do a piece of paper craft. They're going to want to do something in the game. But if it's too early, they're not going to be able to do that. Now, one thing for you as the person that is running this, planning this, controlling this, is when you're putting a constraint around it, try to avoid putting a constraint that's something like has to make the game better or needs to be marketable or needs to be commercializable or something like that. Because while that can be tempting, my feeling is that what's going to happen is you're just going to shut down a lot of people's creativity, and they're not going to come up with as many interesting things. So better to accept that some percentage of your projects are going to basically be dead ends, that they're going to do something, they're going to do a horse breeding minigame, and it's going to be neat, and you're going to look at it and go, yeah, but we're not going to put that in the game, and we're not going to make a horse breeding game either, so that's cool. I hope you learned something interesting, but we're never going to talk about this again. I think you're better off accepting that, because the other benefits of doing this are worth it. The reality is that some people on your team aren't going to actually want to do this side project time. Some people just want direction. They don't want to have to come up with their own things to do. When you're at larger scales, 1 week of side project time or even more, it might be realistic to have them slot into other teams that are forming. But at the very small, a few hours a week scale, then you might not be able to engage these people in the process. And I think you should try not to force the issue. That being said, make sure that this disinclination to participate is coming from a good place. Make sure that they're not declining participation because they feel like their lead doesn't want them to participate, or they don't want to participate because they feel like they've been overtasked. That's, again, not good. If they don't want to participate because they're just really excited about what they're working on and they just want to get down to it, encourage them to participate, but I think that if you force it too hard, you're not going to get anything out of them anyway. It's not going to improve their morale. It's not going to improve their creativity. So understand, sometimes people aren't going to want to participate. Be careful about forcing it too hard. Does your company have some sort of policy around side projects outside of work time? So if somebody comes up with a game that runs on its own, can they do things with it? Can they commercialize it on their own? I'm not saying that they're using your IP, but they've come up with something else. If you don't, you can get into kind of a bad place because somebody made a cool game that doesn't use your IP, and they're like, I want to sell this, and you say, nope, too bad, it belongs to us. And not only can you not monetize it, we're not going to monetize it either. Really, the thing that hurts isn't necessarily that they can't make money, it's that it's just going to be put into a drawer and forgotten about. That can really put a damper on this process. So if your constraints are pretty open and people are going to work on board games or games of their own, make sure that going into this process that there's some understanding that chances are this thing that they are developing isn't going to be monetized. It isn't going to make it into the game. They aren't going to be allowed to publish it on their own and make some money, so that their expectations are in a reasonable place at the start. That can be discouraging, but it's much worse for them to get to the point where they have a game and it's running and they think it's pretty cool, and then you tell them, sorry, but policy is that you can't do anything with this, and then it just crushes their engagement in this process going forward. So make sure the rules are understood right up front. The other thing that I would caution you to be really careful of is you're doing this to give your devs an opportunity to do more creative things, to explore more creative spaces. But don't let it turn into something where you're accidentally having side project time crunch because you're booking 100% of their time for tasks, and then now they have to basically do this side project stuff over and above that full-time job. And maybe because they're passionate about it, they're even doing more than that 10%. They're doing 30, 40, 50% overage. It can become kind of exploitative if you're not careful, So even though I said, I feel like you're getting this for free, you probably shouldn't actually plan that way. You should probably plan for it to have a 10 or 15 or 20%, whatever you're doing, hit on your momentum, on your velocity, and just plan around it that way. And if you get improved productivity as a side effect, great, but you're not building that into your planning process. Something that I really believe in is that policies and structures and norms that you aren't willing to do under stress aren't policies or norms that you're really believing in. So if you are doing DA Fridays or DA weeks or something like that, I think you should try to continue them through your crunch period, through your certification, through your finaling, through all of that. But one of the things that you have to be aware of is that some people are not going to like that. So what do? Well, my advice, the way I think you keep this going, even as the pressure feels higher, is you tighten the constraints. At the beginning of the project, you might say, do whatever you want as long as it's Dragon Age related. In the middle of production, you might say, do whatever you want, but it has to go into the game. At the end of production, you might say, do whatever you want, it has to be finished in this period, and it has to go in the game. And in that finaling phase, you might get super constrained and say, it has to be relevant to the quality of the game as it stands now. It has to be something that noticeably improves the quality overall. So maybe that's just an opportunity for you to let people work on bugs they have been unable to get on. Maybe it's an opportunity for them to try to do something that's slightly out of scope for their normal work and rearrange things. Probably during finaling, you don't want someone inventing a new monster or coming up with a new way to do combat. But I think that you should try to figure out a way to still allow people to apply their creative energies to the process, to the betterment of the project. So I believe find a way to do it, but do be aware that some people are going to get really stressed out if you're saying, go do whatever in the middle of finaling. So you probably don't want to do that specifically. Special thanks to my members. They provide the resources that this channel needs to keep running. If you are interested in becoming a member, there'll be a link down in the description. If you found this interesting, please give it a thumbs up because that lets YouTube know that it's worth sharing with other people. Have you ever worked on a project that did some form of side project time? How did it work out? Did anything really interesting come out of the other side? Let me know down in the comments. I will see you again soon. Thank you.